In the last segment, you learned how to use your knowledge of major scales to determine the quality of virtually any interval. And that method will work for you more than 90% of the time. However, you'll occasionally come across intervals that demand additional methods. So let's take an example here. We have a B double flat up to a G, and the number is easy enough to determine. That's a sixth. And now we ask that same question, does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? Does G belong to the B double flat major scale? Well, that's not a scale we're familiar with, so we're temporarily stuck. But we can bail ourselves out by using the concept of interval inversion, which is a theory topic that you need to know anyway. So let's explain interval inversion with these 4 examples here. We have 4 intervals, C up to D, C up to F sharp, C up to G, and C up to A flat. Let's go ahead and name these intervals, and that should be pretty easy because the bottom note is C in every case. So this is a second. Does a D belong to the C major scale? Yes, it does. It's a major second. Does F sharp belong to the C major scale? No, it doesn't. It's a little bit too big, so it's an augmented fourth. Does G belong to the C major scale? Yes, it does. That's a perfect fifth. Does A flat belong to the C major scale? No, it doesn't. It's a little bit smaller than what we have in the scale, so this is a minor sixth. Now, that's all review. The new thing is this. To invert an interval, all you have to do is change the order of the 2 notes. So for instance, a C up to a D inverts to a D up to a C. A C up to an F sharp inverts to an F sharp up to a C. And you can see where we're going with this. C up to G inverts to G up to C, and C up to A flat inverts to A flat up to C. Okay, now let's go ahead and name those new intervals. So D up to C, that's definitely a 7th. Is there a C in the D major scale? No, there isn't. It's a little bit small, so this is a minor 7th. F sharp up to C, it's definitely a 5th. Does C belong to the F sharp major scale? No, it doesn't. It's a little bit small, so it's a diminished 5th. G up to C, that's a 4th. Is there a C in the G major scale? Yes, there is. So it's perfect. And finally, A flat up to C, well, that's a 3rd. Is there a C in the A flat major scale? Yes, there is. So it's a major 3rd. Okay, now let's step back and take a look at a couple of patterns. You'll notice that for each pair of interval and its inversion, the numbers add up to 9 in every case. 2 plus 7, 4 plus 5, 5 plus 4, and of course 6 plus 3. So that's pretty cool. Now think back a few segments ago, we mentioned the idea that minor and major are in a way opposites of one another, and diminished and augmented are essentially opposites of one another. We also said that perfect is right there in the middle and doesn't really have a true opposite. So with that in mind, let's look for the remaining pattern, which is this. For each pair, interval and its inversion, the qualities are opposites of one another. So major versus minor, augmented versus diminished, minor versus major, with the small exception that if you have a perfect interval, its inversion is also perfect. So these 2 things hold true for all intervals. If you have an interval and its inversion, the numbers always add up to 9, and the qualities are always opposites of one another with that perfect exception. Okay, so let's take this knowledge and go back to our original problem of B double flat up to G. We determined that it was a 6th, but we were stuck after that. But what if we inverted that interval? That is, instead of thinking B double flat up to G, we thought of G up to B double flat. Well, that interval is definitely going to be a 3rd. And we ask that question, does B double flat belong to the G major scale? Finally, we're dealing with a key that we actually know. So is there a B double flat in the G major scale? No, there isn't. There's a B in the G major scale, which would be a major 3rd. B flat would be a minor 3rd. And then finally, B double flat, which is what we actually have here, is a diminished 3rd. Okay, using the patterns that we just saw, we know that the numbers have to add up to 9, and indeed they do. And the qualities have to be opposite. So if this one's a diminished 3rd, this one therefore has to be an augmented 6th. So pretty great. Let's do one more example together. This A sharp up to an E. The number is easy enough to figure out. That's a 5th. Does E belong to the A sharp major scale? Who knows? Let's try inverting it to see if that makes it any easier. So rather than A sharp up to E, we think E up to A sharp. What's the number here? Well, that's got to be a fourth. Does A sharp belong to the E major scale? No, it doesn't. It's a little bit higher than what we have in the scale. So this is an augmented fourth. And let's use those same patterns that we just established. The numbers have to add up to 9, and indeed they do. And the qualities have to be opposite. So if this is an augmented fourth, what we actually have here is a diminished fifth. All right, so time for a very quick quiz. You'll see a few intervals, and your job is to determine the full name of each one. And you might need to use this method to do so. The answers will be displayed a few seconds later, and then we'll resume with the next segment. In rare cases, you'll need an additional strategy beyond major scales and interval inversions. So let's take one example, G sharp up to D sharp. Easy enough to determine that it's a fifth. And let's ask that question, does D sharp belong to the G sharp major scale? We don't really know the scale of G sharp major, so let's try inverting it. What about D sharp up to G sharp? This is definitely an interval of a fourth. Does G sharp belong to the D sharp major scale? That's even worse, so we're temporarily stuck. Let's go back to the original problem though. Is there another way of thinking about these two notes given that it has to be a fifth? Well, a G sharp is enharmonically equivalent to an A flat. That is, it's the same note on the piano keyboard, it's just spelled slightly differently. Is there another way to think of D sharp? Well, D sharp is enharmonically equivalent to E flat. Again, same note on the piano keyboard, just spelled slightly differently. Now this down here is definitely an interval of a fifth, and we can work with this bottom note here. Does E flat belong to the A flat major scale? Yes, it does. So this one's a perfect fifth. Since this one is a perfect fifth, and this one is also a fifth, and they are enharmonically equivalent to one another, this original problem, therefore, also has to be a perfect fifth. In highly chromatic music, you might encounter one more type of edge case. So let's consider this interval C up to F double flat. Well, the interval is technically a fourth. Does F double flat belong to the C major scale? No, it doesn't. F belongs to the C major scale, which would be a perfect fourth. F flat would be a diminished fourth, and F double flat, which is what we actually have here, is going to be called a doubly diminished fourth, abbreviated with two lowercase d's, and then of course the number 4. So anytime you have an interval that's a half step smaller than diminished, it's doubly diminished. Anytime you have an interval that's a half step larger than augmented, it's going to be called doubly augmented, abbreviated with two consecutive capital A's. So time for a quick quiz. You'll see a few intervals, and these will test your ability both with enharmonics and with doubly diminished and doubly augmented. The answers, as always, will be projected a few seconds later.